Good morning, everybody. How's everyone doing today? I got to visit Colin in the hospital yesterday. You know, he broke his hip, fell and broke his hip. Yeah, it's kind of sad, but he was really chipper, and he was feeling really good. And he said, you know, the one thing I'm going to miss is that I know that Cathryn is going to be sharing the Bible lesson today, and I wanted to be there. I thought that was really nice of him, and he was very sincere. So, all right. Let my people go. We started off with this song, and we got you, almost all of you, out of Egypt, a few stragglers. Y'all made across the Red Sea, and this is actually our last lesson today. The last lesson was supposed to be last week with Father Roman, but he was able to come last week and not this week, so we're out of sequence, but I think you can handle it, right? Your brain's gonna get it. Here we go. When Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. The Lord said, go down. Moses, way down in Egypt land, tell, O Pharaoh, to let my people go. So Moses went to Egypt land, let my people go. He made old Pharaoh understand, let my people go. The Lord said, go down. Moses, way down in Egypt land, tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. Thus spoke the Lord, bold Moses said, let my people go. If not, I'll smite your firstborn dead. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell, O Pharaoh, let my people go. That's great. It's a great song. And today we have chapter 18 and 19 and some real interesting things that Cathryn has prepared in this lesson. So I know you're going to really enjoy it. So God bless. Take it away. Let's welcome Miss Cathryn. Are you on? Did you
So we're backing up a little bit to before the Ten Commandments were given out, which we heard discussed so beautifully last week by Father Roman. So we're going to look at chapter 18, and it begins with the arrival of Jethro, who was Moses' father-in-law. And he was the father of Moses' wife, Zipporah. And remember, Moses married Zipporah after he had killed the Egyptian and went to live escaped Egypt area and went to live in Midian, and that's where Jethro was. So let's take a look at the map we have first to get ourselves oriented as to where the Israelites are now. So in the upper left corner of the map, you can see Goshen, which is that fertile area at the top of the Nile where most of the Israelites lived when they spent their time in slavery in Egypt. And it's very green, and it was not a bad place to live if you weren't a slave, but it was very beautiful. And right below that word Goshen is Succoth, which was their first stop when they were on their exit from Egypt. And it was probably their last most comfortable place because after that they entered the desert and then were making their way down the Sinai. They did not take the short way to Canaan. Remember why? Because that little dotted line, Migdol there, that would have been a very efficient and short way to get there. But it was through many fortified towns that the Egyptians had military stations, and they would have had to engage in battle, and so that they were not prepared for that. So they decided to go a different way. The Lord directed them. So they went south and crossed the Red Sea, as we know, and wandered down and had many events happen, and now we find them down toward the tip of the bottom of Sinai, and you can see Mount Sinai marked here. So that's where we're going to be talking about today. And you can see that up in the top in the center is the area where the Amalekites lived. And they were a warlike nomadic tribe that had attacked the Israelites while they were on their way. And we did hear about that. And fortunately, they were able to fight off the Amalekites. There were lots of nomadic tribes that lived, and still are some, that lived in the Sinai Peninsula and desert. So Jethro arrived. He had heard about Moses bringing the Israelites out of Egypt, and he arrived with with Moses' two sons. Eleazar and Gershom were their names, and we don't hear too much more about them, but he did have two sons with his wife Zipporah. And they had crossed over he lived on the other side of the Gulf of Aqaba, over in Midian. So the distance, and if you look at this map, the entire distance of the Sinai Peninsula is only about 250 miles from top to bottom. So it looks really big when we're looking at it here, but it's not as big as it looks in the map. So Jethro was a Midianite high priest, and he was technically a non-Israelite. He was descended from Abraham, but from a different line. And the Midianites recognized the God of Israel, but he remained a Midianite. He did not convert to the Israelite beliefs fully, but he did recognize among all the gods that the Midianites worshipped, he recognized Yahweh as a great God. So it was a form of polytheism, which is, worshiping multiple gods. So the Midianites were from the line of Isaac, as were the Israelites, but they were from another son of Abraham named Midian. And he was born of the woman Abraham married after Sarah. Remember, Sarah died, she was older, she died. Abraham married again, and his wife's name was Keturah. And she was believed to have been descended from Noah. So then they had five more sons, because she was younger. And one of them was named Midian. And so this Midian he had five sons and became the father of the Midianite people who were nomadic. And they were known for trading and living in the northwest Arabian Peninsula. And there isn't any distinct Midianite nation or tribe today, but scholars believe their genetic heritage has likely blended into the modern Arab populations. So some of the nomadic tribes have stayed together and are still distinct, but not the Midianites. They've kind of been absorbed. So there was obvious affection and respect, as you probably read, in between Moses and Jethro when they met, as we see in verses 7 to 10. These describe how delighted Jethro was to hear about all the things the Lord had done for the Israelites as they encountered so many hardships on the journey down the Sinai Peninsula. Jethro even acknowledged that the Lord is greater than all other gods, as he put it. So even though he worshiped many gods, he recognized that this Lord was greater. And this is part of that early transition time between worshiping many gods, which almost all the cultures did in those days, and then finally, as most of the world does now, recognize one God. Almost all the world religions, except for Hinduism. Hinduism still recognizes many gods. That's one of the few polytheistic religions left. So Moses must have been understanding and showed a tolerance for those who did not yet worship only one Lord. So he did respect Jethro for his beliefs. And Jethro told him in verse 11, which we read, "Now I know that the Lord is greater than all other gods, for he did this to those who had treated Israel arrogantly." So he did acknowledge Yahweh as the greater God. So in verse 12, we read that Jethro brought a burnt offering to Moses. This was a big deal, burnt offering. In Old Testament time, a burnt offering was an unblemished animal, and in descending order of value, it would be a bull, a sheep, a goat, a dove, or a pigeon. If people were very poor, they offered a pigeon. But it had to be completely consumed by fire on an altar as an act of total devotion, atonement for sin, and to seek God's favor, symbolizing the worshiper's complete dedication to God. So it was a very serious thing, not done every day. And the smoke would rise as a sweet aroma to the Lord, as they put it in Scripture. So this was unlike other sacrifices, which were only partially burnt and then were consumed by the priest or the people there. Those were not full burnt offerings. So it was a significant act by Jethro, bringing this and offering a burnt offering. It showed great respect for Moses and his beliefs and for God. So then Moses, Aaron, his brother, Jethro, and the elders then shared a meal out of respect and dignity. And them sharing a meal together was very significant, so as it is today when we eat with people. So the next day, Moses undertook a role which he presumably did on a regular basis, that is, serving as a judge for the people. Remember, they had been traveling a long time. He sat and listened all day, settling people's disputes. So, and think of how many thousands of people were in this Exodus. And there would be squabbles and disagreements, and, so-and-so took this and that. And so they would go to Moses, and he would settle the disputes. Now, how exhausting would that be? So when Jethro saw what Moses was doing, he spoke up. He realized this was unsustainable for anyone, and let alone someone Moses' age, because remember, he was in his 80s by this time. So he advised Moses to delegate this overwhelming task by appointing capable, God-fearing leaders to handle the smaller issues and saving Moses for the most difficult. Now, that's a very logical thing that we think of and we practice nowadays, but then it was novel, I guess. So from our vantage point today, we can see that this is a model for effective leadership and justice. This approach to a system for settling disputes is practiced in most societies today with, levels of courts. And this results in very efficient judicial systems. It's interesting that so much of what Jethro recommended is included in these verses. Hardly ever in the Bible do you have so much detail, but there are a lot of verses that detail what Jethro recommended. So the writer, Moses, was considered it very important. So he very logically put forth this argument to him. And one of the details that he put down was making sure he appointed judges who do not engage in dishonest gain, meaning don't take bribes, because that would be an easy thing for them to fall into. So delegation is really what Jethro recommended, sort of a new concept. So there's an early example of, in Scripture, of effective delegation in the book of Acts. You know, this was after Jesus had, arose and ascended into heaven, and the apostles were out ministering in the beginning. So this is Acts 6. In Acts, Luke recounts the episode in which the 12 apostles were busy ministering in Jerusalem when some people complained that the widows of the Greek-speaking Jews were not receiving enough food, because the apostles were ministering to the people body and soul. I mean, they were, providing food and sustenance and preaching the word, all of it. And that's too much for them to do. But at the time, that's what they thought their charge was, and they were trying to do their best. So the apostles then got together and decided, we can't all do this. We need to appoint some men to help us. So they appointed 7 men. And it's documented that they appointed men that were full of the Spirit, meaning the Holy Spirit, and wisdom. So these were very good delegates for them to carry out some of the tasks. And they assigned them food distribution. So this freed the apostles up to focus on prayer and spreading the word and preaching, which was a very efficient way to do it. And at this time, the church really did not have any formal organization or hierarchy. That came later. But this was, the very beginnings when they were trying to find their way to grow. So these men were thought of as the first deacons. And we know deacons are still used today very effectively by many faiths, or many of the Christian faiths. And the Eastern Orthodox use them, the Anglican Episcopalian, the Catholics, the Lutherans, the Baptists, United Methodists, they all have deacons, because it's recognized that, some of the churches and parishes are so large, thousands of families in some of them, that 2 or 3 priests or ministers can't do it all, So the deacons are very, very helpful in many of these churches, and we see them today. And they're, the ones I've heard in all faiths, very effective at preaching and very dedicated to what they're doing. So they are really a bonus for us. So this episode in Acts is a good example of the delegation which Jethro had encouraged so many years before. So when Jethro presented this concept of delegation to Moses, Moses listened attentively, and he took the advice to heart, because he really respected Jethro. He knew Jethro was right, but before that, probably no one had ever spoken to Moses in this way, as no one saw himself of such stature to do so. Moses was really revered, and no one would probably make a suggestion like that to him. But Jethro had both Moses and the Israelites' best interests at heart. So spoken was heard, thus making a significant mark in history. All civilized societies want judges who are honest people and have laws now against them taking bribes. Back to that part. Here in the United States, it's a federal offense for a judge to take a bribe, and there's a considerable prison time associated with it if a person is convicted of that. So Jethro appears for only a brief time in this book, but he has real impact on the future course of Israel and in Moses' life. He must have been a very good, wise man. So Moses was lucky to have him pay a visit then. So we learn more detail about how Moses actually chose these judges in a later book, Deuteronomy, in chapter 1. At that time, he was reminding the new generation of Israelites about their history prior to their entry into Canaan. And many years took place before they got to Canaan, and new children were born, and there was a new generation who really didn't know about the past life they had led. So at that writing, they had been wandering in Sinai for 40 years. So he appointed wise, respected leaders from each tribe to serve as officials and judges. And they kind of traveled in their tribes, which they had always been in. And they were organized into a hierarchy, overseeing groups of some thousands, and then hundreds, and then 50s, and then 10s. So there was a whole series of levels of, say, not really courts, but judges who would look at, solve problems that the people had. Very efficient to ensure fair judgment for the people. Now we move on to chapter 19, which opens with a time marker. We don't see these too often in the Bible. But this one notes that it has been 3 months since the Israelites left Egypt. So they traveled all the way down this peninsula, kind of meandering, because they had to go where water was, and be able to camp for periods of time. Because they had their livestock with them and, families and children, and so they couldn't just walk every day, of course. So they took their time going down. They did cover hundreds of miles, which is pretty impressive. So they arrived at the desert of Sinai, and they camped at the foot of the mountain called Sinai, and it's also called Horeb in other verses, if you might see that word. But this fulfills the promise that God made to Moses when he spoke to him through the burning bush. And it's recorded in Exodus in chapter 3 that God said, quote, "When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." So that was the prophecy that God told Moses through the burning bush. And sure enough, there they were at the foot of Sinai. So they set up camp there, and below that mountain is a huge plain of about 400 acres. And when you go there now, you can see the way the mountains are arranged there. There's no real trees, not many trees around, but there's a flat plain, and that could have supported a large camp of thousands of Israelites. And nearby the plain currently is a monastery, and some of you may know about this monastery. It's very well known. It was constructed on the orders of Emperor Justinian, a Byzantine emperor, a very good emperor, in 527. So Christianity had taken hold in many places, and he ordered this monastery to be built. And it was there was already a little church there, which was on the site that the burning bush was believed to have taken place, where God spoke to Moses. And in it they installed Greek Orthodox monks, and those same Greek Orthodox monks are still there today. Not the same ones, but the same order. They've carried down all these years. It's been completely, permanently occupied all these years, and it's the oldest continuously occupied monastery in the world that we know of, Greek Orthodox. So, and at the time, Emperor Justinian chose, because they knew they needed guarding because of the safety, and the monks were peaceful. They needed people to guard it and to watch over them and take care of some needs. So he appointed these Bedouin families, probably a couple of hundred Bedouins in families, to go and live surrounding the monastery, and they're still there, the same Bedouins. They were Christian at the time, and this was in the 500s. And then a few hundred years later, when the Muslim religion took hold, most of them converted to become Muslim, and they still are Muslim today. However, they have still retained the respect for the monks there, and still guard it, and are very, very closely associated with the monks there. So it's been a great relationship. Now, the monastery and the area, or the monastery itself, was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which is quite a distinction, in 2002. And that means it needs to be preserved as a national treasure, an international treasure. The whole world should be aware of it. But it has a library in it, and many treasures of valuable icons, and wonderful library of thousands of volumes of manuscripts that have always been there, and people can go there and study. And they have one of the monks is the official librarian, and it's just a fabulous library. They're in Greek and Arabic and Syriac and many other languages. And it's second in size only to the Vatican Library, so scholars will sometimes go there. It's difficult to get there, but they will be welcomed, and there's a little guest house there where they can stay and spend a few hours each day in the library studying there. So it's been a very desolate spot for centuries, and only accessible really by camel. And until recently, now you can use off-road vehicles and buses, small buses, and it takes a long time to get there. But it's really considered a sacred spot by Christians and Jewish and Muslim people. All three religions consider it a sacred spot. But there's something that's happening right now that I don't know if you know about. I didn't know about it until I was researching this, that the Egyptian government has, because this is part of Egypt, has realized the economic value of religious tourism. And in the last few decades, more and more religious tourists have gone to Egypt, retracing Moses' steps and, going to, a lot of the sites that are mentioned in the Bible. And they're still pretty rural and undeveloped, but they, get a lot of inspiration. And the Bedouins are often guides for them as they go, especially around the area of the monastery and Mount Sinai. And so what they're doing is developing that big plain and putting in luxury hotels and shopping centers and movie theaters, and they have plans to even put those European cable cars that they put up like in the Dolomites. They go way up to the top of Mount Sinai, and Mount Sinai is like a 3 or 4 hour trek up to walk up the mountain. Has anyone done it here? You have, Bill. Did you take? Part way you can go on a camel or a...
I went up part way to Mount Sinai early in the morning.
Early in the morning, that's when a lot of people go.
I made almost to the top.
Yeah.
But the rest of my group did almost.
Yeah. The last 700 feet is apparently very challenging.
Really challenging.
Yeah.
Very rocky.
Yeah, rocky. Yeah.
Very interesting.
But very interesting, right? A lot of people go up in the evening or the morning, and it's a very moving, sacred place. But so this is happening now, and there's been a lot of objection by religious groups, as you can imagine, to this development. And but there is little that can be done about it because it's Egyptian land, that land down at the bottom. The Greek government and the Greek Orthodox Church have been very vocal because they're concerned about the monks and the preservation of the monastery. But fortunately, it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the monastery itself. So that will hopefully help protect it. But it's going on, and we may hear more about it in the future. It's called the Great Transfiguration Project. That's their name for it, the Egyptian government. So, and World Heritage Watch, if you can get to their website, has some very interesting photographs of the way it used to look and the way it looks now with the new roads that have been built and some of the new buildings. And you can see the old way of how beautifully desolate it was, and the Bedouins, and then the new construction. So the monastery itself is important for us, we as Christians, for many reasons, and one of them is because it's where a very, very famous ancient Bible was discovered, and that's called the Codex Sinaiticus, Sinaiticus meaning Sinai. And a codex is one of the sort of a book in transition between scrolls and books as we know them today. So this is the Bible that all of us grew up with, and we all had one in our houses, and I had one, and I never questioned as to how it came to be. I mean, we knew it was the writings of the early the Old Testament and the New Testament, but how did it get to look like this? And who decided what was in it? Exactly what was in it. So there was a whole long transition between the way things used to be written, which was on scrolls. The Old Testament was written not in like that. it was written on scrolls. And if any of us ever had the opportunity to time travel and go back to the Library of Alexandria, you know that one that burned down, it was all scrolls, thousands and thousands of scrolls all stored. And these are miniature ones. But the way they were read was that you would have the scroll rolled up in one hand, and you would, one or the other, Hebrew did it one way and Greeks did it the other way, and you would unroll it, and there would be columns of writing, and you would roll it up with the other hand and read that column, and then keep rolling and read the other column. So it was kind of a laborious process. And if you wanted to go back to reread something you had read the day before, you had to find it. And these were very, very long. And they were usually made of papyrus in the old days. And this is a piece of papyrus that I got. It's from Egypt. And I'll pass it around, you can see it. And it's real. And artists use it nowadays, so it's easy to still buy these. And they sell them in larger sheets. But the papyrus plant, has these tall reeds. And there's a whole process of pounding them and then laying them out. And they have sort of a sticky substance inside. So when they lay them in a crisscross fashion, here, I'll pass it around, you can look at it. Then they're dried and and weighted, and then they come out relatively flat. And you can kind of glue them together. So they would make these long strips of them and write on them and turn them into scrolls. They're a little bit bumpy, so you have to be careful of the writing. They aren't as smooth as the written paper that we use nowadays. But and this is something that's very interesting to me. When I first read it, I thought, well, this maybe isn't true, because you read one thing and you think, well, maybe it's not true. The early Christians were very instrumental in the transition from scrolls to books. And there's a term that is sometimes used for these called book rolls in that transition. And the transition was over a few hundred years. But the early Christians, when they were gathering their writings together, from the epistles, the letters that the apostles had written to all the different cities and the converts in the cities, they would be copied and redistributed and copied again, so they were shared. So they were all different pieces. And then there was the Old Hebrew Bible, which was, of course, written in scrolls. And so when the early Christians were putting things together, they were putting them more on flat leaves. And they decided to bind them. Other people had decided this too, but on the left-hand side and make sort of a binding so you could turn pages. They were very large. And each page was called a leaf, and each side was called a page. And we still use those terms now. But they created something which, what I just mentioned, was found in the 1844 in the monastery that I've been talking about, and it's called the Codex Sinaiticus. And this is one of the leaves. This is a facsimile of one of the leaves in the exact size and shape. They're very large, and there's 347 of these in the British Library, and that's where most of these are. But they were bound on the left, and you could turn the pages and read it. And it was much more efficient because the Christians found that they could go back, mark a place, and go back and find something that they wanted to read again, just as we take for granted now. They didn't number the pages then, but at least that was a start. So it's written in Greek, and this Greek capital letters, they're called uncial letters. And you can see that there's no spaces between the words because it was printed on vellum, which is a very, very finely made calf skin. Very expensive, and you wanted to save space. So, and interesting that they kept these columns because that's what they were used to with the scrolls, because as you unrolled a scroll, you had one column visible at each time. So they kind of, for a while, kept this wide columns. And as codexes went on in the next few hundred years, they became wider. The lines would be longer instead of these narrow columns. So I'll pass this around and you can look at it. This is from the book of John, although Pastor could read it, but some of the words, but I can't. So And they also decided that parchment wasn't what they wanted to use because they wanted something better. So they used vellum. And this is a piece of vellum that I bought maybe 30 years ago in Paris, just from a dealer on the street. You know, the way they sell antiques in Paris, they put up little pop-up things in a square, and they sell things. And this was just an old document from 1785, and I was just intrigued by it. I didn't know what it was. It's not religious. It's I think it's a contract about selling something. But it's a good example of vellum. And this is it's folded and it's tied. There's little ties here. But if you look at the back, you can see the pores of the animal's skin. So this one is not as finely done as the Codex one, because the one that they used for Codex was very expensive to produce, and the paper, not paper, but the vellum is so thin, it's just beautiful. And it must have been very expensive to produce those. So people have always wondered who paid for these codexes to be done. There's 4 of them known in the world. They're all from about 350 to 450 AD. And some people believe it was Emperor Constantine who would have had the power and the money to order these to be written and made. And they would have taken a long time to write. Bill?
I think it was his mother. We were told that Constantine's mother was one of them seeking all the churches and trying to find all the, and she had power to do a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And that was one of their thoughts.
Yeah.
They told us.
Right, I've heard that too, that his mother was very instrumental in promoting Christianity and had a lot of authority. So we're lucky to have these, and it was discovered in 1844. It had languished for, how many years since it was written in 350 or so, until 1844, when this German Bible scholar named Constantine von Tischendorf decided to go to the eastern area, they called it the Orient in those days, looking for early biblical manuscripts. And what was happening in the early 1800s, people were writing things that were not true about the early church and the early writings, like saying that John did not write the Gospels of John, and they were written hundreds of years later. And in a way, you can see how these developed, because they didn't have any way of no printing presses. They didn't have any way of reproducing documents except for scribes to copy them and send them to other cities and people to study them. So things got copied and recopied and copied, and then little things would be added, and different thoughts and different ideas, and you can see how a document could evolve. And so a lot of scholars were very doubtful about what is really true in our biblical references. So one of the things that he decided to do was to go to the old monasteries, because he had an idea that old monasteries would have these kinds of documents. And sure enough, he found it, and they were in a wastebasket. But that's another story. It's a very long, complicated story as to how all of this, came to light. And it's now, most of it's in the British Museum. There are some leaves that are in 3 other places. But I put on your handout a website that shows the entire Codex Sinaiticus on the website, because each of the 4 libraries that has them, the scholars all agreed that people should be able to view the entire codex somehow digitally, and so they digitized everything, and it's a wonderful website. You can zero in on things and move around, and you can translate it, and it's very interesting. So but if you really are interested, this is something that's fascinating. There is remember Movietone News? Remember, between films and old theaters, they would show little newsreels of things. And there was one called Movietone. And in 1933, a film was made of the handover of the Codex Sinaiticus, it's like this big, this thick, because there's 347 leaves, from the Russians to the English. And how that came to happen is that Russia had it by, that's another story how they got it, but they needed money they were in dire straits of money. And so they had this thing they knew that Britain really wanted, the English world wanted. So they sold it to the British government for 100,000 pounds, which was many millions of dollars in our money now. And they had to raise all that money, so they made a plea to the public for a great deal of it. And interestingly, some Americans contributed too, because some of the British people wrote letters back to America and said, please send, a few dollars. We're raising money to buy this old Bible, the oldest Bible in the world. And so people did it. So we can be proud that some of Americans contributed to this purchase. So anyway, the newsreel thing, it's only a few minutes long. It's fascinating to see, is of the Russians handing this valuable thing over to the Brits, and it's only wrapped in paper, it's heavy. And then the next part is one of the negotiators, one of the scholars, looking at it with a couple of men standing beside him, and they're flipping through it like it's a phone book. And now, you can't touch it. But it shows how thin the paper was. You can see in the film how thin, not the paper, the vellum, how incredibly thin it was compared to the one you are passing around there. So if you Google that, you can find it. If you just Google Codex Sinaiticus handover Russia to England, you'll find, it'll come up as a little YouTube thing. So that's very interesting. So to me, for us learning about how our Bible that we study and love and cherish came to be is very interesting to do, and to see that God had his hand in all the little steps along the way of, that man finding those old documents and all the preservation that took place all those thousands of years ago. So it's something that we can be very glad that exists. So now we go back to Moses at Sinai here. So Moses went up the mountain, so they're camped, and he made his way up the mountain, which took him hours, I'm sure, and God spoke to him up there, and God reminded Moses of what he had done to Egypt and how he had brought the Israelites out on eagle's wings. Has anyone ever heard the song On Eagle's Wings? It's a beautiful song. We haven't really sung it here, but it's based on one of the Psalms and this part of Exodus and one other piece of scripture. And the eagle would have been something that the Israelites would have been familiar with, because it was a bird of great strength and also very nurturing in its raising of its young. So it was a great source of comfort and protection. So it was a great metaphor to use. So then the Lord goes on to say to Moses in verses 5 and 6, now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So this was a new covenant. So this new covenant between God and Israel at Mount Sinai is the extension of the Lord's covenant with Abraham 600 years previously. Remember, that was the first covenant. In the original one, there was a total consecration to the Lord. And remember, he promised them land and descendants and continuous blessing if they kept the faith. So that was the first covenant that was made. And in this Mosaic covenant, we call it, because it was, involved Moses at Sinai, the condition was that Israel was to live by God's rule, meaning the Ten Commandments, because that was a new thing, the new part of the covenant that was given at that time, and to serve his purposes. So, and those two have been handed down, in the Jewish faith and the Christian faith for all these years. So Moses went back down the mountain and shared what God had told him with his people. They readily responded they would do everything the Lord had said. So then Moses went back up. This would have taken a long time, and reported to the Lord. Then God said at that point, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes and be ready by the third day. Because on that day, the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. So, wow, the Lord doesn't come down in the sight of people very often. So these instructions were really for outward preparation to meet with God and what they call ritual purity, purifying yourself ritually. So, and the symbolism of this is that the Israelites would be transformed from a slave people into the chosen nation. So God warned the people not to go up the mountain or touch the foot of it, for it had become holy because of his presence up there. So they could not themselves go up the mountain. God said, only when the ram's horn sounds a long blast may they go up the mountain. And remember, the ram's horns were the shofars that the Israelites and many other peoples in the past used to communicate with each other, and they were like a twisted horn. And if you blow through it, it can go a long distance. And some of them were very long and had very loud sounds associated with them. And I'm sure the Israelites used them on their trek, and wandering around to communicate with each other as far as what time to pray or whatever. So on the morning of the third day, the people then witnessed impressive events with thunder and lightning surrounding the mountain. A thick cloud was over the mountain and loud trumpet blasts. So the final verses of this chapter are filled with dramatic events, with the Lord at the top of the mountain, but warning the people not to approach lest they perish. This is thought of as both a demonstration of God's awesome power and also a test of obedience. So only Moses and Aaron, his brother, were allowed to ascend the mountain, acting as mediators to receive God's word for the people. And this demonstrates that that man needs an intercessor with God. And some scholars see this as a foreshadowing of Jesus, who will be our mediator and ultimate redeemer. So some people interpret it that way. So this chapter was intended to prepare for the tremendous consequential events of the giving of the Ten Commandments, which we heard last week. But so that's the end of what we're going to talk about today. So we have some questions here, which we could look at. So first one is, how important is it to maintain family connections in light of Moses' relationship to Jethro? And what can we learn from the respectful and loving relationship between Moses and Jethro?
I think one of the most important things is how much it affected all of us to be isolated with COVID. You weren't to see your friends or your relatives or your church or your anything. You were to stay. I don't think everybody did, but it was a terrible injustice to all of us and a setback.
Well, you had to get along with your family, right?
It was isolation.
Yeah, it was isolation. But at the time, that was thought to be the best thing for safety. But it probably strained a lot of relationships, especially if they weren't optimal, or maybe it strengthened some. People actually got to know each other more instead of, just living out all that. So always good to keep good relationships with your family, right? And are there going to be different opinions within a family about things? Yeah. We wouldn't be people if we didn't have different, we don't want our families to be all carbon copies of each other. You want individuals and their own personalities and experiences. But we have to respect those and honor those. And Jethro and Moses definitely had different experiences and beliefs, yet they came together in a loving relationship for a goal. And I believe God used Jethro very deliberately in this scenario to intervene and help Moses in that time and help him with decisions. So Moses, and the second question is, Moses accepted his father-in-law's advice with positive results, some of which are in place today, our judges and courts. What is some advice you received from an older and wiser person in the past that you took to heart and it affected your life? Do you have some?
I'd have to say that it was my dad. He was a third-generation water well driller in Merrill, Wisconsin. And I worked with him in the summers and also on Saturdays. And in fact, when I was 12 years old, I was able to drive the truck back of the well drilling machine when he moved it from one location to another. That's after I learned how to drive it on a tractor on the farm. But with that, he told me that it was best not to follow suit as a water well driller, to go to someplace, do something else, and go to college. And that's what I ended up doing. And the hometown of Merrill, Wisconsin was 10,000 people when I was a kid, and today it's 9,200.
Great advice. You can keep that. Yeah. Great advice. And you took that advice and
Yes.
became, yeah. Yes, that's why you're here. Anybody else have advice from maybe a family member or family friend? Bill did, yeah.
Yes, my friend was my father-in-law. Like Moses, I needed a father-in-law to help me a little. And he was a direct guidance to me. When Sarah and I got married, I had wandered around a little bit. And I was a rancher and a farmer and this and that. But he helped me guide me and said, you need to go back to school, get a master's and get going. And during my career, he was I'd call him, I'd call Bay, and Bay would either be up to see me or we would have a nice chat. And he was always very godly and very smart, tremendous man, very, very respectable gentleman.
That's great to hear, yeah. And you know, we have to think now, we are those people. We are the older sages of our families. So if we have an opportunity to, you know, give some advice, even if it's not asked, you know, just can do it in a gentle way, just by giving an example of something in your life to one of the younger members of your family, they'll remember that. And it might, you know, help them in later years. Think, oh, you know, auntie or uncle or grandpa told me this, and maybe they were right. Maybe I should keep going to school, something like that. Yeah. So that's great. That's good, Bill. Great story. And see, you remembered it all these years. Yeah. So a third question. Go ahead. Oh, good. Oh, Judy. Yeah.
My mother, dealing with procrastination. Don't think about it, do it.
Yeah, that sounds like our mothers. Yeah. Very good. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess the most significant advice that I took from outside my own mind was relatively recently when my wife died in 2013, and I was living at home. I was fumbling around. I won't say living, but I was fumbling around at home for a number of years, and things got progressively worse, and we had a family meeting. What are we going to do with that old guy? And I wanted to stay at home, and they all convinced me, no, you can't do that anymore, Dad. I said, fine, we'll just get a person to come in, move in, and keep the house for me, and I'll stay here at home where I know where everything is. they didn't like that idea, and they said, no, you go to a facility where they care for you better than just one person. And I objected to that violently. I did not want to be thrust into a new world of total strangers, but I listened to them and came to, then it was a matter of finding one. We looked around and we all agreed that the village had more to offer than any of the others. So I came here, and after about a year, something happened. And I tell you, it was the most blessed event that ever happened in my life, because I did find another wife, and things are different now, and things are better now than they could have ever been any other way.
Yeah. Thank you, James. We're happy for you, too. That's good. Great. Okay, we're almost out of time. We have 1 minute on the third question, and then Pastor's going to say some words to us. So, we talked about polytheism and the religions that worship graven images and idols, and we don't have those so much anymore to tempt us. But we have other idols. What idols or worldly things might threaten our wholehearted devotion to God today and require us to reconsecrate ourselves and focus on Him? Is there anything that can capture us and divert our attention from the Lord every day, or young people? And things that can misdirect our worship. You know, you just get so attached to something that you really just forget. Yeah.
Sports?
Sports. Someone say sports?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, there you go, yeah.
Media, and so many.
Yeah,
so many
media.
choices for young people more than us, probably.
Yeah.
So many
Yeah.
things to focus on that can be.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of layers to that too, not just the media, but what the content and what can happen.
Yes,
Yeah.
on sports, it's like, on the weekends, the kids now are going to all these special games, soccer games, or baseball, or whatever, and missing out on church.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a real tough deal.
Yeah,
Transform them.
I don't remember games being played on Sunday morning before, but now a lot of sports, kids' sports is Sunday morning. You know, they have to go to games. Just too bad. Okay, well, we're running low on time, and Pastor's going to say a few words about winding up our study of Exodus and a little bit about our next series. So, thank you.
Oh, that was really wonderful, wasn't it? Yeah, with the sports, there was a guy in my church, he said, well, NFL season started, you won't see me until it's over. You know, I mean, so it's not only just the kids, and I like watching a football game, but he said, you won't see me in church from when NFL starts until the Super Bowl is done. Well, that's half a year. I know Ron is a great fan of the Green Bay Packers, but you see him in church, yeah. Well, thank you. This is the end of our Exodus. We got you out of Egypt. And so just briefly, the rest of the book, well, this is half of the book of Exodus. We got to the 10 Commandments where God gave them the laws, but the rest of the book of Exodus is here's 20 chapters in 20 seconds. They built a tabernacle. They established a priesthood. They established all the offerings to be given and the feasts that they were to celebrate every year, which, of course, is Passover is coming up as one of them. And this all happened in two years. They built this, they came out, they were slaves, they plundered Egypt, they got all that wealth, and they came and they built a tabernacle, and it ends, the book of Exodus, with the glory of the Lord coming down on the tabernacle. And just a little over 2 years' time, what can change in 2 years' time? Isn't that amazing? So, but that's all a study in itself, all the tabernacle and everything, which we're not going to go through at this time. Next week we will not have a Bible study. Okay, we'll send out a one call so you can be reminded. But then we're going to start on our new Bible study. It's called Great Prayers of the Bible. And these are the people who prayed great prayers, such as, well, Moses prayed a great prayer, and if he hadn't prayed this prayer, the Israelites would have been all wiped out. Hannah prayed a great prayer. She's one of the great prayers of the Bible, and we got the prophet Samuel, and he anointed David to be the king. What about the Lord's Prayer? That's one of the great prayers of the Bible. And John 17 is also one of the great prayers that Jesus prayed in the Bible. We're going to study these. Hezekiah's prayer. He was dying and God heard his prayer. So these are the great prayers that the history of our Bible and our salvation rested on, these great prayers that were prayed. Jonah's prayer in the whale, remember that? And there are really some powerful things that took place during these prayers. And we're going to study these great prayers. Why was that prayer written? And how was it answered? And what does that teach us about our prayer life today? So I think this is going to be a real enjoyable study of the prayers of the Bible. And that will start on April 1st, right? And we're not fooling you. We will be here at April 1st. So let's close in prayer. Thank you, Lord, for the book of Exodus. Lord, you let those people go and they became a great nation. So we pray that we will keep on our journey, our exodus, till we reach the heavenly city and there worship you and be with you forever. Thank you for each person here, and may you bless them in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks for coming. This has been a great time. I hope this helped you understand the book of Exodus a little more, and away we go. And one question. What was the name of that monastery, Cathryn?